There are things that can keep teachers awake at night. Conflict between students, teachers or parents, wellbeing red flags and moments of crisis. In schools, educators must respond effectively to these challenges in an ever-shifting landscape. In this series, teachers, school leaders and wellbeing practitioners take on curveball scenarios from everyday school life, and in the process, highlight positive approaches to wellbeing. I'm your host Mick Walsh, and this is Trials for Teachers. Hello, today I am joined again by Ashleigh Dalton. Ashleigh is a practice director and senior occupational therapist with Connected Kids. She's got vast experience in working with students, families and support staff in early learning and secondary school settings. Welcome back, Ash. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back.
No problem. Are you ready?
Let's go.
Please note that the following scenario is fictional and any similarities to events in any real school context, past or present, is purely coincidental. Liam, a 10-year-old in grade 4, frequently has intense, unmanageable outbursts when he perceives an instruction as unfair or when he makes a mistake. These episodes involve yelling, throwing objects, and sometimes aggression towards peers and also teaching staff. The school is considering a suspension due to the frequency and severity of the incidents. This is quite a tough one, Ash. Really difficult. We'll obviously go through and we'll look at some initial responses to when something like this occurs in the class environment. We'll look at follow-up support and ongoing support. So Ash, initial thoughts?
Probably initial thoughts would be safety. So safety for Liam, safety for the children in the classroom, and then also safety for the teaching staff. Yes, that might be in the classroom as well, because safety is paramount.
Absolutely, and that's got to be the focus when something like this occurs. And when a student is volatile and they're in a state where they're worked up, things can happen. And the worst case scenario is students, staff become injured, or Liam himself becomes injured as well.
Yep.
And I suppose for a classroom teacher, that is an incredibly difficult scenario to kind of
because you're trying to manage everyone. And pick up on how everyone is coping. You're also trying to read Liam and his early warning signs that might be there or might not be there. And you're responsible for all of the people that are in the room. So it's really hard to be trying to teach and do all of those things all at the same time. Yeah,
and look, probably one thing that teachers would need to consider in that environment is that they can take reasonable actions to look after themselves and other students, but they've got to look at what the minimum action is to actually protect everyone.
Correct, yeah. And I think in this scenario here, hopefully this classroom teacher has extra support in the room to help them manage a child that sounds quite volatile.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, and it's possibly someone who has ES support or learning support already.
Yep.
If these sort of actions have sort of been a trend over a period of time.
Yep.
And obviously, there might be some strategies, such as if a student is really volatile and they're becoming violent, making sure that people are removed from the space.
Yep.
And potentially schools have lockdown procedures that they need to follow in an incident like this. So alerting senior staff as quickly as possible, and whether that's a teacher nearby, but supervision is critical. A teacher can't just abandon ship when there are other students in the environment.
Yes.
And also probably there are also instances where it might be prudent to remove the class rather than the student.
Yep.
To ensure that the impact of that behaviour is minimised.
Yeah, and I think also a certain level of pre-preparation is done for that class then. If you know you have a child who is prone to having this kind of volatile behaviour, front-loading the class of this is what happens when this student does this, this is how we stay safe, so that, the rest of the class isn't impacted too much when that, cue is given. Hey guys, we're leaving. Hey, we're moving now to X space. Because we want to make that as smooth as possible for everyone as well, because everyone's learning is disrupted. And we also want to make sure that they feel okay about that too, because it can be a bit triggering to see that, maybe multiple times in a week.
Yeah, and for those other students, it's not something, as you said, when you're sort of preloading with them, it's not to create alarm.
No, it's to try and reduce anxiety, I think, more than anything, because if it happens and they get caught unawares and they're not front loaded for that and they can't sort of go, oh, this is what happens when we do this, then it's going to be more alarming and more distressing.
Yeah, and look, those students, it's not their fault that they're in the space with someone who is disruptive and volatile. But what it does is there is learning there in de-escalation. There's also learning in kind of tolerance and how we can support other people within our community, but also the best ways in order to keep yourself safe.
Yeah, I think it, we can't take away these experiences for these kids. There's going to be this in whatever school you choose for your child. There will be children who struggle along the way. And I think it builds resilience for the kids, but it also builds a picture of like, learning is not easy for everyone. And I have to be able to coexist in this world with all different types of people.
We also get with this scenario, we get into kind of the murky sort of waters of restraining and seclusion. And within schools, what's acceptable, what is a reasonable way to respond to something like this. And as I mentioned, you would always take the path of least resistance in a sense. But if a teacher is in a situation where they have to sort of physically restrain a student, it's really important that staff follow school guidelines or department guidelines, which means that you can't sort of do that if the behaviour has stopped. And it is only reasonable to kind of stop someone from hurting themselves, whether it's the student hurting themselves or others. And the seclusion aspect is important as well. I know that within some school environments you've done some work on not seclusion, but creating a space for students when they're in this position. Yeah,
so I've worked with a local school on creating a couple of different spaces that meet the need depending on the presentation. So we've created, a room that we call the movement room, where it might be for when you are feeling a bit more heightened or you've got a bit more energy to get out. And then a sensory room that is a bit more of a calming space. And these rooms have been developed, in conjunction with myself and the school, and the staff have been trained on how to use them. So that's probably something that is a big thing that, not all schools will have that. But this school is lucky enough to have that. And I think it's used in conjunction with early warning signs plans. So we're trying to get to the stage where restraint and seclusion is not even on the table because it's not needed. So looking at, what are the early warning signs to that child's escalation? When, their face starts to get a little bit red, or they start to grit their teeth, or they clench their fists. Those are little signs that the behaviour is starting to escalate. And then what's the next phase of the behaviour escalation? So we're trying to get in then before things escalate. We see those little signs. Hey, it's time for a break. Let's go to the movement room together. Going to that space and then choosing an activity in the movement room that can be done together with the ES. Okay, let's, we're going to do the boxing bag. I do 10 punches on the boxing bag. You do 10 punches on the boxing bag. That way then there's still a connection element to it, and it's not seen as a punishment of being removed from the room and taken away from the space. It's being used as a productive movement break that promotes connection and a chance to talk about, hey, I noticed that you started to get upset. What's happening? Because when kids escalate, you can't do any of that.
Yeah, and we've discussed previously the idea of safe, sane and secure environments that Bill Rogers subscribes to in terms of classroom management. And one thing that's clear is that a lot of young people come from environments where they don't have security at home, where that typically violent responses are normalised as a part of daily life. Yeah. So then adapting to a school environment is different. So what you've spoken about there in terms of giving students a safe space, and a movement room that you've described is a safe space for that student, and then also creating a chance for them to connect with people. And it becomes not only a bonding exercise and they feel that people have their back, but also a chance to de-escalate.
Yeah. A chance to de-escalate, a chance to move. Like a lot of that aggression or that nervous energy can actually be extinguished by actually moving the body and just kind of getting it out. And as long as it's done in a safe, productive way, then, putting a child in a room with a boxing bag and shutting the door, that's a restraint. And that's actually not that helpful, because then they just go hell for leather on the boxing bag. But if you use it in a productive way and it's targeted and it's done with a safe adult and there's a purpose behind it, then that's a productive use of time.
Yeah. Is there, in terms of, let's say that as part of that initial response, Liam does sort of regulate and calm down after an incident, what do you see as the opportune time to do the work in terms of unpacking what happened?
Yeah, and that might be on the way back to the classroom where, Liam and the ES talk about, hey, what happened? How do we stop that happening in the future? Can you take 10 breaths before we walk back into the classroom, just to make sure you're fully back to a regulated space? Typically, 10-year-old boys don't like to talk about their feelings, and they don't like to sit down and, look someone in the eye and talk about it either. So sometimes if you're doing it while you're walking back to the classroom or to the next space, it feels less invasive or less, nailing him down for those ideas about what had happened. And, I often say to parents when I work with parents in the clinic, have the conversation in the car, because you're focused on the road, you're driving, the child doesn't have to give you eye contact. It feels like there's less pressure around the conversation. So, that can be used in the school environment too.
Yeah, less confronting.
Yeah.
There's other things to focus on in the car.
Yes, and I don't have to sit here and look at the ES and be like all eyes on me. It feels like less pressure.
So with that, obviously if an incident like that has occurred in the classroom and there's been sort of a sense of violence and perhaps that safety's been compromised, staff who are there, it's really critical that they write up really clear incident reports about what's occurred, because that might paint a bigger picture within the school environment. And that contact with family is really critical as well, to let them know as soon as possible that there's been an incident that's had a wide impact and the actions taken by the school, and that making sure that the parents are aware that the actions taken are done for the benefit of the young person, but also that we have to provide a safe environment at the school as well. In terms of that, the work with family, what does that sort of look like in terms of engaging them potentially in helping to solve this problem?
Yeah, you're hoping that Liam's family is on board with collaborating with the school to find a solution. But a lot of the time, the behaviours that we might see in Liam might be happening at home too. So maybe the family isn't as supportive as what we would want them to be, but it needs to be a collaborative approach across home and school. In this scenario,
at the end of the scenario, it talks about that the school is considering a suspension due to the fact that these incidents have become more frequent and severe over time. And obviously schools have escalation policies, and that consequences are a part of the school environment that need to be provided. But that has kind of that has both positive and negative effects.
Yep. Suspensions are a tricky one, because, there are criteria from the department around suspensions and procedures in place in each of the different schools, but sometimes suspensions are actually just counterproductive, because the child, if they don't want to be at school, will do anything they can do to get a suspension because they like being at home. And sometimes that can be if the parents aren't on board and they're not working in a collaboration with the school. If the child's having a great time at home while they're suspended, then of course they want to be suspended. They don't want to be at school. Yeah. So I think suspensions have their place, but I think also should be used as a last resort, because oftentimes they don't achieve what we want them to achieve. But there also has to be natural consequences, which I realise too.
Yeah, and the natural consequences is a part of it. And also you've got staff and students who, through a child not being in that room for a space of time,
can be like respite.
Yeah, it is respite. It's a bit of a breather from the behaviour, and they can focus on, other
learning.
Focus on the learning that they need to do. So that's an important part of it. And I suppose there are potentially opportunities in schools, and I'm talking primary and secondary, where some of the work can be done at school. And so you're getting the student into the environment. It might be an internal suspension. It might be missed class sessions. And probably if you don't have the support from family at home, you might have, in the school environment, you might have some work that can be done, some positive work.
Yep.
And that might be about, again, to reference Bill Rogers, it might be about sort of describing the impact of some of those behaviours in an environment where the student doesn't have others around them.
Yep.
They are de-escalated and they've got a chance to maybe reflect. But also maybe modelling some of those, how those incidents have emerged, modelling some alternate ways to approach it. And do you see any value in the work that teachers can do as opposed to kind of external support?
Yeah, I think teachers and support staff have a huge role for these kids, and I think we know what we can do in that 6 hours that they're at school, and we can model and do and label and show all of that time. But if it's not being followed up at home, that's a really hard thing because the behaviour is really hard to change then. So you can model and label and do whatever you can do in that school environment for that 6 hours. But once they leave, if it's not being backed up at home, it's really hard to make change in that space. And I've had lots of conversations with teachers and with ES, learning support officers, who kind of feel frustrated by, they're giving everything and they're showing up and they're doing all of the things that are recommended. But it's hard to see the change because maybe that isn't that child's experience, and their early years, that was not their experience either. So it can be really hard to change the narrative in that short period of time.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. And I think when we talk about those non-supportive home environments, I think it's really important to find common ground. And the common ground is that you've got the best interests of that child at heart.
Yep.
And even if you've got a volatile home environment, generally at the base of it, there's a sense of that they love their child.
Yep. Maybe they don't have the resources. Maybe they themselves, their own family of origin or their own experience of being parented is very different, and they don't have the skills there to do the things that we would want to see from them. So I think it's about meeting them where they're at too. So acknowledging, okay, I'll meet you where you're at. Can you do this and I'll do this? And let's work together to bring Liam to this point in time. Yeah,
and also an understanding that whatever actions the school take, ultimately you're looking at how to support the student. Whether it's work that you do outside of class, whether it's the boundaries that you put in place to ensure safety of others, they're all of benefit to the student as well.
Yep.
And I think it's really important to highlight that. In terms of how the sort of follow-up support that we provide to Liam, there's clearly involvement of senior staff in those conversations, and schools have a role in supporting everyone to be safe in that environment. We spoke about making sure that you document these incidents really specifically, and that external support as well can be important. In terms of that class safety element as well, I think that families can often be concerned if their child is in a class, and the school will often get direct feedback on that, which is something that's difficult to approach. You also mentioned that there's a restorative element here, and as a staff member who's been in there, or a student who's been impacted by that, the restorative element can sort of pave the way for positive outcomes.
Yep.
And it's really difficult if something like this has occurred for Liam to then just go back into the class next day with the same support staff, with the same teacher, with the same students that he might have impacted.
Yeah.
What's the role of the restorative element for you?
Yeah, well, I think those re-entry meetings or those return to school meetings can often happen with the senior staff. but not necessarily with the people who have probably been most impacted. So there needs to be some kind of ability to repair it in the relationship with the teacher, with the ES, with the other kids, because it's hard. It's hard for them to move on. Like, they still remember. They, you know, and Liam may not remember sometimes the extent of his behaviour if he kind of gets to a really heightened place and he can't remember some of those things that do happen, which we would see for some kids, but everyone else is still deeply feeling those things. So it's really important to repair the rupture, and whether that's a conversation with the teacher, whether that's a whole class discussion, whether that's, you know, an apology letter, it's important to teach kids that, you know, we can have a rupture in our relationship, but we can repair. And sometimes they may not learn that at home. So it's important to model that at school.
Yeah, and there's a really big difference between a young person feeling that this incident has occurred and then we're just back in the classroom, to then feeling like this incident occurred, the school has responded, my safety is important, I've received an apology, and I understand where this other student's at.
Yeah.
And also that there's a flow-on effect to families. And we've got, around Australia, we've got a lot of diverse classrooms, and there's an understanding that we've got work to include everybody, and there's lots of different people with different profiles, and students in this situation also learn potentially how, in good ways, how to de-escalate, or how to
de-escalate, conflict resolution, problem solving. Like, they're all great skills for every child to learn. And it's also important for, you know, kids like Liam to learn, like, not that you're off the hook if you apologise, but, you know, that you can come back from that, because for these kids who might have more volatile behaviours, then they get painted as a naughty child, and then they're put in a box, and then they want to live up to that persona. So we have to try and take that element of it away as well, and be like, you are part of our class and you are a part of our community, and we've repaired this rupture and we're moving forward. We don't accept necessarily the behaviours, but we can move on.
Yeah, I just want to talk probably finally about with Liam, and he's in grade 4. Where you know, we might be at the end of the year, we're moving to grade 5. We've got different maybe personnel in the room. There's also in the education system, staffing can be a really difficult challenge at the moment. Liam's people might not be at the school on a given day. He might have someone replacing as a CRT. There might be a different ES support person, and so the sharing of those strategies is really critical, that the school has a safety plan in place for him, what that looks like and what are the actions that are taken. Yeah,
I think something that has worked well with lots of trickier kids has been to get them to do like a bit of a one-pager. And this can be done with a teacher, it could be done with a therapist, it could be done with an ES. Things that they would want someone new to their room to know about them. You know, my name's Liam, I like this, this and this. I don't like this. When I get heightened, this works. When I get heightened, this doesn't work. So that the person who's coming into the room automatically just gets one page. You don't want some report from a therapist like me that's like 10 pages long and you just think, I don't have time to read that. So a one-pager of, you know, this is helpful in Liam's words and this is not helpful in Liam's words, as well as maybe some input from other people, but just a quick reference document that straight up tells you do this and don't do this is a really helpful thing to have. Of course you need the safety plan, of course you need all the other things, but just having those quick strategies as a reference guide is a really important thing. And doing that with Liam when he's in a regulated space is a good thing because it's got his buy-in. Yeah. And if you don't have his buy-in, you don't have anything.
And teachers, obviously, in an environment where you might be coming in just for the day or you might not know the student, that having that quick reference is really critical. And then people who have his ongoing care, you'd hope that there'd be really consistent information provided by the school in transition.
Yeah.
And also that, as we've mentioned before, opening up the dialogue to any external supports that are in place or any strategies that might have worked previously, whether it's in a previous school environment as well.
Yep.
So to look at some key takeaways from that. And again, Ash, if I've forgotten something, but we looked at the safety element as being critical from the outset. That Liam's safety, student safety, staff safety is paramount, and that staff need to take minimal reasonable actions to look after people, and that really following and being aware of guidelines within your school or the department is critical there as well. And if you've got a student like that, it's probably be good to be aware of what the boundaries are and what you can and can't do to support the child.
Yeah.
We also talked about how we can follow up with someone like Liam and provide a safe space. And you talked about the movement room, where not only does it give them a chance to de-escalate, but it's supervised, and it also helps students to connect with other support staff or people that they're involved with. We spoke about the work with family and sometimes how that can be challenging, but also in an incident like this, being really clear and documenting what's occurred, being really quick to contact senior leadership if any sort of lockdown procedures or any other support needs to be put in place, because it is a significant issue. We also focused on the restorative element as being critical. And then as we look forward, making sure that we have really accessible documentation to support Liam in terms of quick references, in terms of transition documentation that is more thorough for people who require it.
Yep.
Is there anything that I've missed, Ash?
I think that's it.
Okay.
Well done.
That's really good to hear. What a sum up. Thank you for joining us today, and please contact us through our socials and have your say if you've got anything to add to that conversation. And as always, Ash, I want to finish with one of your personal favourite wellbeing wind downs.
Yes, well, it's kind of not much of a wind down, but before I go to bed, I do like to do a good reset of the house, so that when I wake up in the morning, everything's reset and it feels like I'm ready to have a great day. So it's not so much of a wind down, probably a bit of a wind up before bed, but it really sets me up for a great day the next day.
It's kind of looking after tomorrow's version of yourself.
Future Ash is thankful.
Yeah. Right, so you'll get up and everything's sorted, and I can appreciate that one. Mine is a little bit different again, Ash, right? So I really enjoy listening to just a loud song in the car. It might just be on the 5-minute journey to the supermarket or whatever, or on the way to school, a bit of a pump up track or something.
Yeah.
And depending on the mood, can be different things.
Yeah.
But I think just a loud song, singing in the car really just releases a lot of...
Good release. Good
juju.
Yep.
It kind of gets me ready for the day.
Get the day going.
Thank you. So to all the people who hold the line in our schools, while you're all busy taking care of your others, make sure to spare some time for yourself. Until next time, this has been Trials for Teachers.